Ross, I enjoyed this piece that you wrote in your New York Times column in a couple of months ago now about polyamory, and particularly about Huberman's recent travails in relation to polyamory or failed polyamory. I don't know. this New York Magazine cover about the fact that he has the famous neuroscientist podcaster has all these girlfriends and he's been deceiving them about the existence of the other girlfriends and so on. And the point you make, which I thought was funny and true, was that in a sense, what polyamory is trying to do is trying to accept the sexual revolution, accept promiscuity and male sexual appetites and so on, but put them into a more orderly and sort of safe and therapy speak container to make them tolerable, mostly for women, I think. It's a way of women processing the existence of the sexual revolution without actually resisting it. I think, have I got that right? That was your argument.
That might be a more intelligent restatement or more interesting restatement of my argument. But yes, it was something like that. The jumping off point, as I recall, was that, New York Magazine had this run of cover stories. One, a sort of user's guide to polyamory, right? And then one, this, not sort of intensely moralistic, but at least somewhat moralistic treatment of, the buff, bearded scientist podcaster's multiple affairs, right? I shouldn't say affairs since he's not married. His multiple relationships, and there were people on social media who just said things like, there's this tension here. 1 minute New York Magazine is telling us polyamory is good, and the next minute it's polyamory shaming poor Dr. Huberman. I'm not a regular listener to his podcast, as anyone who examines my physique would know. But yeah, and I thought, other people said this, but I thought that was wrong. I think you have to see polyamory as an attempt to do something different than just sort of say, powerful men are going to have a lot of girlfriends, and if they're married, they're going to have mistresses, and that's fine. That's not at all what polyamory is doing. It is trying to sort of negotiate a space where you can have sort of, I think a version of what you just said, but sort of therapeutically managed promiscuity where no one's feelings get hurt and there's no deception, right? The good doctor was engaged in a sort of serial deception of essentially making promises of at least quasi-fidelity to these women, at least with at least one of them. He was trying to conceive a child, I think, right? And none of them knew about the other. And the polyamory is basically saying, well, we can solve all of the unhappiness associated with this kind of behavior, not by, expecting people to be monogamous and be in bourgeois marriages and all of the stuff that, we think is out of date. We can solve it by making sure everyone communicates adequately about their sexual needs and their emotional needs, and that with the right balance of communication, people can be married or in relationships, also have sex with other people, and this will all be liberated and fine, right? And female friendly in some sense, right? That this is sort of, in a way, an attempted resolution to some of the issues that that you raised in your own book about the sexual revolution, right? The odd way in which we had a sort of feminist social revolution that ended up sort of defending a sexual landscape that seemed to be oriented more around male sexual desire, right? How do you resolve that tension? Well, if you don't want to be bourgeois or heteronormative or monogamous or Christian, right, you can say, well, we're going to feminize promiscuity, maybe.
Yes, except of course, as you know, Huberman's apparently extremely good at using therapy speak to manage the women in his life. He speaks fluent Californian, right? And that doesn't seem to have been. I mean, what you sort of suspect from me, I don't want to speculate too much on. Have you noticed, by the way, that he has just steamrolled through this? He's just not publicly acknowledged it at all. If anything, his podcast has become more successful. There's been this kind of Streisand effect where it's only done him good. But anyway,
I mean, no, and I think that's, I mean, this is a separate kind of discussion, but I think that is just sort of characteristic of the current dispensation, that people have recognized that once you are subjected to an attempted cancellation, right, or whatever we want to call it, right, there is the audience landscape now is sort of segmented enough, and there's enough room to operate without the approval of New York Magazine, that you actually gain nothing by sort of trying to reconcile yourself with or apologize in any way. So yeah, I think that's, I mean, you see that with lots of people now. He's not the only case study, but I think it is a sort of a real sort of shift in the landscape from 4 or 5 years ago. Like, he didn't put out a statement saying, I'm growing and learning and seeking my truth, and I apologize to anyone who I have inadvertently hurt. I mean, which he probably would have done had this happened in 2019 even.
Yes. And I guess he sort of relied on an assumption, which I saw expressed quite a lot on social media in response to this, an assumption expressed more often by men, which was that, but of course, this is one of the perks of being Huberman. Like, you're handsome, you're successful, who the hell wouldn't think that this man, he's in his 40s or whatever as well, and he doesn't have children. I mean, like, what did he think he was doing? Sort of the assumption that this is what high status men tend to do. The thing that was dubious about it, and the thing that was the target of particular opprobrium in the piece, was that he was being deceptive. And you had to sort of assume that deception must have been part of the thrill for him, because if he'd wanted to do normal spreadsheet polyamory, he could have done so. There would have been no shortage of candidates.
Well, do we think so? I mean, this is one of the open questions, right, in the polyamory craze, is to what extent is that true, right? It's tough to get large number or sort of realistic numbers about how many people are actually engaged in polyamory. I will say that, in my own sort of social worlds, to the extent that they touch on those worlds, I have not encountered a lot of what I would call sort of high status women engaging in polyamory. I mean, again, this is I'm speaking from limited experience, right? But it seems to me that, like, you have different categories. You have women, the woman, I'm going to forget her name, who wrote the memoir, right, recently, about being, entering into an open marriage and having all of these sexual
which one? I
right,
swear
the one that I think Mary Harrington reviewed it. It was reviewed. Yes. It was reviewed everywhere.
I think I have it on my shelves.
Yes, it's an important text for our time. But that seemed like a classic case of a woman in a marriage, the husband wants to open the marriage. She doesn't want to lose her husband, so she sort of enters into this lifestyle, right? So you have cases like that, and then you have sort of, the kind of Bay Area polycule world, right? And then you have a lot of people where it's sort of like, you're calling something poly, right? But it's really just somebody kind of juggling multiple relationships in a way that, you would see in dating markets in the 1970s or 1980s. I'm just not sure. My guess is that there is a subset of desirable women who would like to date someone like, a handsome 40-something well-off celebrity podcaster, who are much more likely to date him, just to stick with him if they think there's a possibility that they're his one and only, and who would certainly not want to say, "Oh, I'm part of a famous podcaster's harem," right? Not that there aren't some who would want that, but I feel like you expand your pool through the deception of the false promise of monogamy, even now.
Yes, I'm sure that's true. Evolutionary psychologist Diana Fleischman, who's a friend and has been on this podcast, and is poly herself. She says that women have a threshold. You know, there's a threshold at which the man is so attractive that you will accept being part of the harem.
Right.
And every woman has that threshold, and every man is somewhere on that scale. And that, I guess, yes. So Huberman has very high sexual market value. So presumably he could have still had
Right. He could have.
a
Right.
harem,
Yes. He could.
an open harem if he'd wanted, but maybe not. Maybe yes, you're right. Maybe he's slightly persuaded some women. There's a kind of marginal cases.
Is there also a limit though on the harem size? Right. Too. Like I feel like I could imagine, again, a sort of desirable, high status woman saying, "Well, I'm dating this celebrity podcaster, and he's dating a couple of other. He's seeing another woman at the same time. He's seeing two other women at the same time." I also feel like that's different from saying, "I'm one of seven. I'm one of seven women. I'm his girl. I'm his girl in Minneapolis." And it just, I don't know. Again, it just seems like sort of, it's like a difference between saying, like, well, it's also like the difference between saying, well, I have a husband and I tolerate his occasional affair, versus I don't even have enough status to, rank as one of the, the top, the inner circle or something. Again, I'm speculating in ignorance here. So